That that was incredibly kind. Thank you so much. Thank you. And you all have been duped. Apparently, you've all just been indoctrinated into my cult. That breathing exercise slid that under the radar. I have the photos. I'm going to share it on social media of all of you taking the initiation. So, but no, seriously, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thanks to Hatch. Thanks to the organizers, everybody. This is a fantastic day, yeah? Yeah, all right, very good. Well, let's get to it. Hello, Berlin. Which, incidentally, is was the title of a chapter of my high school German textbook, and which is seen here. And I was surprised that the fashion has come back around since the late 90s. So, anyways, so let's get into it. Here's my clickbait title. Is atomic design dead, right? Which is a good way to get people to perk up after lunch. But what I'd love to do is spend some time and just kind of reflect back on 10 years. It was 10 years ago this year that I created this thing called atomic design that is still kind of making its way around. So I figured that this is a good time to maybe reflect. So if you're down with it, let's go on a little trip together. So, once upon a time, websites, right? 1991, first website, 1991, CSS was born. 1994, GeoCities, anybody from that era? Yeah, some old people like me. But yeah, like if you were creating a GeoCities website, well, how are you designing that website? You were just writing HTML, right? That was it. And pasting in an animated GIF or two or something like that, right? That was my first website was like a Dragon Ball Z fan website in 96, 97, something like that. Somewhere along the mid-90s, this idea of like, we could take our brochure in Photoshop and we could slice that thing up and plop it onto the internet. And creating killer websites is released in 1996, kind of showing this kind of, we could design these things and then we can kind of like build them in the browser. By the mid-90s, late 90s, is like, oh, this internet thing kind of has legs. So we're not going to just have our website, we're going to have our intranet as well, right? And maybe we have some more Photoshop files to sort of design and slice up to make our intranet website. So this here introduces a little bit of a tricky thing here, right? So one, we have designers and developers all of a sudden, right? This kind of general divide, but now we have this divide in between these different products. And so we have these things like brand style guides or brand books and stuff, right? These things have been around since the 60s. And we're like, here's the logo and the white space around the logo, and here, this will help you make websites, which it doesn't, but whatever. And then in kind of 2004-ish, we have this thing called Web 2.0 that comes out, and this thing called Ajax. And all of a sudden, we start getting these more interactive experiences. So we have these things called like web apps, whatever that means. But it's like this more interactive kind of web experience. And of course, with that comes more Photoshop that, of course, should follow the brand guidelines. And all of these things are loosely connected, hence the sort of dotted lines, right? Then all of a sudden, Steve Jobs, one more thing, and brings us the iPhone, and Android kind of comes along around that same time, and a year later we get the App Store and the Google Play Store released in 2008. So more Photoshop files, right, coming in, and they should also probably follow the brand guidelines, but that never happened. 2010, this tool called Sketch comes on the scene and starts eating away at the sort of Photoshop world. We actually have this kind of dedicated user interface design tool that starts, making this job a little bit easier. And then sort of around like 2010, 2011, this notion of like kind of for developers, things start sort of picking up a little bit where we have this tool called Bootstrap that comes along that's basically like, here's buttons, and here's alerts, and here's these other things. And it was kind of around this time, 2010, responsive web design kind of became a thing. And it's kind of like at this moment that like this notion of kind of more sort of component-driven stuff started coming online a little bit. So we kind of have Bootstrap entering the picture. We also have this sort of, again, these concepts starting to grow up largely in like the development world, right? You have people like Natalie Down sort of talking about more sort of component-driven CSS. You have Nathan Curtis, who's still operating today in the design system world, wrote a book called Modular Web Design. But you also had all these sort of introductions of these more sort of modular-based CSS practices, things like SMAX and BEM and OOCSS and all of that good stuff. 2012, Angular comes on the scene, right? 2013, React comes on the scene, and all of these things are these very like component-driven things. It's also in 2013 that I created Atomic Design and learned that React came out, I think it was like 2 weeks after I published and first talked about Atomic Design. So it was pretty interesting. But so 2013, all of a sudden we're like, okay, here's this new crop, this new generation of things that are actually like sort of building in this idea of kind of like components as a concept into the sort of foundations of this stuff. And so that's exciting because now all of a sudden we have like more stuff. We have these websites and stuff that are now trying to follow this pattern library, and like here's this HTML and CSS you could copy and paste into your project in order to get it to get that look and feel onto our websites and web apps and stuff. It's also kind of around this time, like 2011 and stuff, we start to get this idea of kind of like UI kits and stuff like that in Photoshop and Sketch. And it's like, here's these kind of like floating sticker sheets of components that are just kind of like hanging out, and designers can take those. But that's like the kind of first introduction of kind of like UI-centric sort of brand, guidelines that go beyond just like, here's the brand blue, please use the brand blue, right? So it's just helpful. Other things start popping up. Material design comes out in 2014. ES modules, which is like how you actually deliver components to the browser, kind of comes out in 2015. I published my book in 2015. But it's kind of at this time that React kind of keeps exploding and really grows in popularity. And all of a sudden, we're like, oh, we can actually create a React library that's actually directly consumable by all these different products. So that's like our first kind of solid line here, where all of a sudden it's like, here's this thing, you could actually import it into your project and get this stuff that's actually connected, which is really exciting. And so you start seeing these relationships sort of form where people can like follow these pattern libraries, but now all of a sudden you have this like real thing that can be imported. It's also kind of around this time, this is what, 2016, 2017, Figma enters the scene. And Figma and Sketch both released this idea of like Teams libraries in 2017. It was like it took that long for design tool makers to go, holy shit, do you know that sometimes designers work with other designers? Yeah, I know, crazy. We should maybe do something about that. So it took a while. But that was a really welcome addition, because what that allowed us to do, right, is not just like have these kind of like loose things anymore, but instead like these more sort of connected design libraries where you get to kind of have, here's our button, and then other teams or other projects can be using that button. And then it was kind of around this time that things kind of started to coagulate enough where we're like, hey, we're doing all this stuff over in the development world. These tools are coming online, and designers are starting to think about this. And in fact, what we're all kind of doing is like just different flavors of the same thing, right? So it was around this like design systems kind of came to be in like 2015. The first Clarity conference which was like the first design system specific conference, came out in 2016. Also so this concept of a design system really started to sort of take root at this time. We're no longer just like kind of talking about like style guides or pattern libraries. It's like, here's this thing, it's called a design system, and it's got kind of all of this stuff kind of hanging together, right? And instead of just like basic like UX guidelines, they're gonna kind of call it like a reference website like material.io or polaris.shopify.com or carbondesignSystem.com and things like that. So we now have this whole concept, everything's hanging together, and then things just kind of keep getting thrown onto the pile. This idea of design tokens, right? Which is another thing that kind of emerged around the same time as like design systems or shortly after, which is like, here's these brand variables that define a design language, and we want to use those things kind of consistently throughout. And those things are able to sort of find their way into both their design tools as well as our code tools, as well as being documented in our reference websites. And also, these things, unlike web-based components, can actually travel to iOS and Android, which means that we can kind of define, your brand blue in exactly one place and then deploy that to any different sort of software product, irrespective of its tech stack. Then what happens next? It's just more and more things just kind of keep coming. Just more and more and more and more and more. More web apps, more things, more tools, more frameworks. And it gets overwhelming, especially if at like the tech end of things, right? So it's kind of this technology called web components that's been around since like 2011 was whenever it was like first introduced, but it's really kind of in the sort of 2015, 2016-ish that this stuff starts to become a little bit more stable and kind of enter the scene. And what this does is allows us to start delivering user interface components to any web experience irrespective of what it's built in, right? So all of a sudden we now have, here's our button, here's how it looks, here's how it feels. We're able to sort of plug that into a React app, an Angular app, a WordPress site, a Drupal site. Doesn't really matter what the technology is. And that's really, really welcome, because before then it was just a lot of sort of juggling and copying and pasting and duplicating efforts and things like that. What else happens? Figma just eats Sketch's lunch like all day. And it's like, even to this day, it's like everyone's either made the switch to Figma, or it's our clients that are still sort of struggling with acquiring a license or whatever bullshit they need to go through in order to switch over. They're just like sad looking through the window at all the cool kids in their Figma land and stuff like that. But yeah, so this stuff starts getting more connected, right? There's a lot more sort of solid lines. And then tools like Zero Height come on the scene that sort of like sucks in your Figma library, sucks in your code library represented in Storybook, and actually sort of documents these things kind of like live in one roof, instead of like, here's a JPEG of what our button looks like and it's out of date and all of that stuff. So all of a sudden we now have this like really connected design system ecosystem that is like actually powering real software. It's like we've gone from like PDFs, right, and brand books into these things that are like actually these kind of like deployable, importable things, which is pretty exciting. And just along the way, and like things have gotten like so much more complicated. There's like recipes, what we kind of call recipes, or child design systems. So if you think about like material design as Google's design system, like there are like YouTube recipes and Gmail recipes and Google Calendar recipes and Google Maps recipes, right? These are things that maybe don't live in the core design system, but are still really important for these products to actually function. So anyways, kind of putting that aside, what we have is this general shape of a thing called a design system, and then we have a bunch of different products, right? And these things have a relationship to one another. And if all goes well, you have a design system that informs and influences what products sort of, look and feel like, right? And then in turn, those products inform and influence what's in the design system, right? And this is great. Easier said than done, as we've learned. Because sometimes you get different weird stuff going on, usually because of people, right? You either have like the design system being like, we're just gonna go over here and create the perfect button, and like the products are doing their own thing, and it's like, okay, that's a fun little off to the side design exercise, very helpful. You have the opposite of that, where you have like the pattern police, right? Militantly sort of shouting at anybody that misuses a checkbox, right? It's like, how dare you detach that instance, right? We're coming for you. And then you have the flip side of that, which is just like the product just going hump, just totally eating the design system. It's like, you're in my world now, right? It's not about creating something that's meant to be sort of scalable or reusable. It's just it just gets sucked right into the orbit, the gravitational pull of the product landscape. So again, this is a really hard balance to achieve in practice, especially as I was sort of showing earlier, that as this idea, as this notion, as this concept of a design system started to sort of take root, and actually, teams got stood up, and they, live in a separate team than these other teams and stuff. Like that distance and that relationship between the design system and the products that design system serves, it's challenging. It's hard to overcome. So, how could we help with this? As it turns out, 10 years ago, I made a thing that is meant to help with exactly this. So, that's what we're going to talk about. But first, I want to take a little detour into a recurring segment called Just Another Day in Old Brad Frost's Inbox. I was introduced as being kind of like a weird celebrity. I don't know how the hell that happened, honestly. Like, it's bizarre. There's a fucking fog machine, I think, working right now. Like, this is weird. Continues to be, like, I'm just the guy, right? I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In the United States, this is not like whatever. But for some unholy reason, I get these emails from people, and I want to welcome you into my world of what my inbox looks like. Hi, Brad. I was wondering if you read mail with empty subjects. Are you receiving my emails? Just checking if you're receiving my emails sent from my iPhone. I haven't heard back from you despite my several attempts to contact you. I'm starting to worry. Please let me know if there's any way I could help or call 911. If my words have failed me, it's time to unleash my secret weapon. I've attached a picture of a dog wearing a monocle. According to the internet, his name is Rufus. I trust this will charm you into submission. I'm a retired pre-press graphic artist. I hope it's okay I scoped your Monopoly Photoshop file to use on my dead cat's public and not-for-profit Facebook website, Cheddar's Dreams. My aim is to educate and entertain while helping keep my brain in shape. And if you're wondering, you're damn straight. I looked up Cheddar's Dreams Facebook page, and there's the project in there. Just downright bizarre stuff. And then, of course, there's your old classics like Hello Viable, my name is Undefined, and I work with Undefined and Undefined on their Undefined. My team and I are looking to create an Undefined that helps us Undefined. We would like to keep the project costs between Undefined and Undefined. We would like to complete this project by Undefined. Sincerely, Undefined. But then there starts to be like these things where it's like, people are starting to grumble a bit, right? So it's like there's a great tool if you want to learn how to code. There's this thing called Code Academy. Apparently, I spelled it wrong, and it says no wonder why we need so many programmers, because people like you suck. LMAO. but kind of introducing you into this world a little bit. This is what the gist of so many of my emails include, which is atomic design is not necessary. There's no need for new names when we already have well-established labels like elements, modules, and patterns, saying, shouting at me about the correctness or incorrectness of what's in my book. We are using elements, modules, blocks, layouts, and page examples, like, is that okay, or whatever. Please, let's change pages to screens. And it's just like a decade of this now. Just people going, this is nothing new. What you created sucks, and all of this stuff, right? But so people go, I don't want to offend you, but like, my team doesn't use. It's like, dude. Get in line. It's okay. But I do want to spend a little time to just like talk about how this notion of atomic design, even though it was this buzzword created a decade ago, I think still has a lot of relevance in this day and age, because at the end of the day, we have websites and apps, and they need to be made of smaller components, right? That's a kind of a given, right? And those components need to have a relationship to those products. And so that's what atomic design is. It's this mental model for thinking about user interface in this interconnected hierarchical way, right? So atoms, if you were to blow up literally any user interface in the world, right? Whether it's a Bloomberg terminal, whether it's a bank's ATM, whether it's a website, whether it's an iOS app, doesn't matter, right? You blow up any user interface, you get things like this, right? You get labels, you get inputs, you get buttons, you get these things that can't be broken down anymore, right? These are effectively like our raw HTML tags, effectively, right? Not terribly useful on their own, though. So at the molecule level, what we do is we take those atoms and then we combine them together into these simple components that I call molecules, right? The label doesn't matter, whatever. It's just a simple component that does a thing. Now all of a sudden, this label defines this input tag. Now all of a sudden, clicking on that button will do something to that form. Those relatively simple components combine into more complex components, right? Like a header, and this is something that we see on literally every website on the internet. And this header organism, as I call it, might be comprised of a logo atom, primary navigation molecule, search for molecule. But here's this thing that then embodies its own sort of properties and has its own responsive behavior and things like this. And it collapses to a hamburger menu at this breakpoint, and so on and so forth, right? And then from there, we put these into the context of an actual screen, right? What I call a template is a template for this reason, because what we're doing is we are just kind of showing how this stuff all hangs together, but it's intentionally just kind of like the skeletal system, right? It's like the scaffolding for a given page. And then it's at the page layer that we're actually pouring real representative content into that template, right? So here's the actual thing that real human beings see and interact with whenever they visit our software products that we're designing and building, right? So it's at this stage that obviously this is the most tangible bit. This is the actual thing that all of this other shit is for, right? But it's also at this layer that we're able to sort of validate or invalidate how well those lower level, more atomic components are actually sort of working, right? Do they actually serve this specific picture of the mountains with this specific length of headline, right? Does this work with different images or different length headlines, right? And if not, then we need to sort of adjust that stuff, right? It's also at this stage that we're able to sort of test different variations or states of a different product. Logged out versus logged in, user versus administrator, new user versus veteran user, all of that good stuff, right? And again, like this is for like literally any user interface, right? So this concept can be applied and has been applied to all of these different things, and it helps teams create more informed design systems that are informed by the real states of their applications, right? So all to say, is atomic design dead? I would argue no, just because this relationship still exists, and this relationship is actually really critical to the ongoing success of both the design system and the products it serves. Make sense to everybody, hopefully? Feel free to fight me. I'm used to it. So that brings us to this state of affairs, right? Where we're at now. It's like, okay, well, we've got design systems, we've got these products. What now? Like, how do we accomplish this, or how do we take this forward, or what's next on the horizon? There's kind of a cruel irony here, because when we talk about design systems and when we talk about the benefits of them, we're talking about saving people time, right? Preventing people from having to reinvent the wheel every time they need a freaking card component, right? Or like not having people sweat about like the makeup or the basic functionality of an accordion. Wow, we've got 7 different teams building accordions. Well, we'll create a design system to create that one accordion. That's a good idea. But the irony is, now we have the entire world producing the same freaking accordions, right? In their design systems, the same tabs, the same form controls, the same buttons. Let me guess, you have a button and it's got a primary version of it that looks a certain way. You got a secondary button that looks a certain way. You might have big buttons. You might have small buttons. You might have buttons that have icons before them, or maybe even after them, or maybe they're just the icons themselves, right? With no text associated with that, right? All to say is like the world over, right? From Berlin to Bangalore to Bangor, Maine, I don't know, whatever. You got the idea. We're all building the same shit, right? And so similar to this aha moment that we've had with design systems, it kind of begs the question, well, why don't we just have one? Why don't we just have a design system, one accordion pattern, right? One tabs pattern, right? One form field kind of thing that then sort of powers all of our design systems and apps, right? The state of affairs as I see it right now is that we're basically, especially like on the code end of things, we're basically, a bunch of IKEA parts, raw materials, the low-level dowel rods and screws and springs and whatever, and it's like, here, go build a dresser with that. Good luck. Go build your Malm. Malm people, talk to me later. But how's this going for us? The answer is not well. When you look at accessibility, which is, in my view, like a pretty key proxy for how good a product's quality is, there's this thing called the Web A Million. They go out and crawl the world's top 1,000,000 homepages the world over and do this big report every year. And it's just like 50 errors per page on average. We suck. We're really, 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 really bad at what we do. And when you like pick at these errors, they're often like just absolutely like 101 level errors. It's really hard to get that stuff right whenever we're like working with all these like individual little like dowel rod and screws, and we're needing to sort of assemble these things just right with very little instruction or guidance, right? So my argument here is I think that we need more kind of like prefab kind of stuff. We don't necessarily need a bunch new HTML tags to accomplish accordions and things like that. What we need is kind of like this layer that sort of sits on top of this world that can kind of serve as like a base for these common components that, again, we're all building and recreating the world over. So things like a date picker. Has anybody like worked on like date picker fields? It's like, what a fucking waste. What a waste of human talent and potential. It's like, let me guess. You click on the right arrow and it advances the month. Right? Pretty sure it works this way in Germany as well as in the US, right? And so it's like, what are we doing? What are we doing with our time here on Earth, right? There's bigger fish to fry. There's bigger things that we need to worry about. So instead of having like a little thing where literally every label, you have to make sure you associate it with the appropriate sort of text field or input field. Why don't we just have these things that we could just kind of drop in that sort of takes care of those relationships for us, has us not screw ourselves over again and again and again. Make the accessibility of our experience. If there's accessibility defects, you solve it once, and you solve it for the world. That sounds kind of nice, right? That's pretty cool. And here's the trick, though, to all of this, and I know you designer types are saying, but I'm special. But you, Brad, you don't understand. My form fields are artisanal, right? And this is the beauty of this stuff, is that, like, what we're basically, I think, what I'm advocating for is it's just like, this is what this stuff looks like out of the gate, right? Which is just like totally unstyled browser defaults, just the same as you get whenever you just plug some raw HTML with zero styling and like publish it on the web. There's this like kind of default styling, just very like kind of crude and baseline. And then from here, especially in the world of web components, there's things called CSS, custom properties. You could basically have a set of those and then flow a certain set of design tokens through these shared components and achieve different aesthetic differences, right? But the structure, the functionality, the relationships, the semantics, all of that shit is already taking care of us, right? So we still have the aesthetic control, generally speaking, for what we need. What are we doing? What are we doing, right? So that's my big idea, I think, of like sort of something that I've seen as I duck my head into all these different organizations of all shapes and sizes and see the same shit over and over and over and over and over again. It's like, let's take it down a level, right? Let's actually sort of really work together. Like, we build this thing called the web, and it is this incredibly powerful vehicle for human communication and collaboration, right? It's been, bastardized. It's taken some weird left turns, but that same promise of the web, of like, hey, let's actually take this piece of technology and use it to sort of bring people together and solve problems together, that still exists. The promise of the original web is still alive. Last thing I'll say, I'd be remiss not to join the rest of the speakers who have all sort of mentioned AI at this stage in the game. This is an interesting one. And this is what I've been sort of describing so far has been the workflow, right? We're human beings, we make websites, and that's how websites are made, right? But increasingly, we have this thing where we can sort of have humans barfing stuff into AI, which in turn barf out websites, to put it elegantly. Right? And here's the deal. What we're going to see, and what we are already seeing, is this process happening a lot, and it's only going to get worse. In fact, it was proffered that 90% of the world's online content could be generated by AI by 2025, which is incredibly depressing, right? In addition to atomic design, in 2013, I also created a talk called Death to Bullshit and created a website for it that sort of articulates what I mean by bullshit. And you could see there's just all of these different anti-patterns and all of this cruft and all of this stuff that's honestly getting in the way of delivering real user experiences to real people, right? So I explain bullshit as being superfluous or unnecessary, cluttered or clunky or needlessly complex, intentionally deceptive or insincere. It gets better because I think eventually it just kind of settles out at the creepy girl. Let's see here. It's coming. It's coming. There we go. But that 90% of online content generated by AI stuck out to me because in my talk, Death to Bullshit, I referenced this thing called Sturgeon's Law, which Theodore Sturgeon was this science fiction author who was asked the question one time, he was asked, why is 90% of science fiction crap? And he said, well, when you think about it, 90% of everything is crap, right? And so it's true. In this age of AI and this very easy way of just snapping your fingers and just blasting out more content, more stuff, more words, more images, more whatever, right? We have to decide, do we want to be part of this 90% of the crap, or do we want to be part of the 10% of the signal, right? Because it takes some time and effort to, maybe we still use AI to sort of help us in our work, but we still need to check and validate that that stuff is good and ethical and isn't going to sort of poison or destroy the world. But the problem is that that process takes longer than that process, right? So we have a decision to make, because I think that we are at this really important inflection point in our species where we have to really sort of hold up a mirror and really say, like, what are we doing here? What are we trying to create? How do we create experiences for others that sort of elevates our world and brings people together? How do we make respectful uses of our time, right? How do we really sort of capture our human potential rather than just drawing the same freaking rectangle for the 25th time, right? Like, we're at this moment, and it's a very exciting moment as well as a terrifying moment, right? To really evaluate, like, how do we harness our collective talents and abilities and potential and actually like work together and exercise our humanity and our good judgment to make things better rather than worse. So with that, thank you.